How long does it take to buy a seven-figure business? Well, how long is a piece of string? What current environment are we acquiring in, and what's your business criteria? So there's many factors that come into how long it can take to acquire a business. The entry level for somebody buying a seven-figure business is around the $1 to $2 million range. And that means the pool of people may be but larger than the pool of businesses coming up for sale. That is the reality that we're in. Make sure it's going to meet reality versus coming to the space and saying, I've got 100K and I want to buy a $3 million business. And if you never bought an acquisition before, and you might not have much credit worthiness, but you heard from some podcaster or influencer that you can buy a business no money down. Well, in theory, you can, but are you going to be buying something that the seller is desperate? Hi, I'm Jaryd Krause. I'm the host of the Buying Online Businesses podcast, and welcome to today's pod. You are going to be hearing from me and myself, and the reason being is because I went back and looked at some data, and I've realized that you guys actually like me talking on the podcast. Who would have knew? I went and checked a bunch of the solo podcast episodes that I've done, or a bunch of our top podcast episodes, and many of them are of me just sharing my experience in mindset and acquisitions. And in this pod, I'm going to talk about, can you actually afford to acquire a seven-figure business? And what are the real costs of buying a seven-figure business? It's a different bracket to buying something under the $500,000 price range. Under the $500,000 price range, typically, it's mostly cash. There's not a whole lot of finance involved. Yes, sometimes you can have some seller financing, typically around the 20% range, maybe a little bit less, maybe sometimes none at all, depending on how good the business is and the level of competition in the acquisition on other people bidding for the business. Also, for a business under the 500K range, typically it's a lot cheaper to acquire these businesses. And the reason being is because sometimes people aren't getting a lawyer involved. Many times, I would say, under the 500K range, especially under the $200,000 price range. Lawyers aren't involved. Typically, it's template, letter intents, or asset purchase agreements and contract of sales. Typically, I do believe you should have an advisor like myself at least overlook the due diligence that you've done or the due diligence that somebody else has done. Due diligence can be a lot cheaper as well because typically you're doing it yourself or learning yourself. And for smaller deals, it's typically cheaper. You still be looking at a price range of what it would cost to do DD on a business up to $1 million if it is under that 500K range. And the reason being is because people aren't really doing DD or paying for due diligence packages on businesses under that 500K range. Now, what are some of the costs that you have when you're acquiring a seven-figure business? We're talking about $1 million up to 10 figures. And then above 10 figures, it's even more. I've been helping people acquire seven-figure business for a while now. I've been doing it on the lower end range for a very, very long time. And now the seven-figure range I've learned so much in the last few years through a bunch of different acquisitions. So what are the key costs? Typically, lawyer, finance broker. Then you need a finance fee. Typically is going to be the lender, and it could be an SBA fee or your lender fee. Then you're also going to, I would suggest using a buy-side advisor for them to either do some work in terms of finding the business, performing due diligence, and even advising on the business, whether they do DD or not. If you're not using a buy-side advisor, you can then go away and look at packages for due diligence. And those due diligence packages can be anywhere from, depending on what you get, can be anywhere from like $6,000 up to $30,000, depending on how large the business is. Sometimes even a little bit more, depending on the complexity. Then you also have escrow fees that need to be paid as well. Now, let's talk about the actual costs of each of these things and some of the things that I believe are important for you to know. The first thing is a lawyer. If you are buying a 7-figure business, you should have a lawyer on board. And a lawyer is typically going to cost 1% to 2% of the deal. So on $1 million transaction, you're looking at around 10 to 20 grand, depending on how much legal due diligence you actually want. Sometimes you can get cheaper packages. Sometimes you can get more expensive packages. Now, when it comes to using a lawyer, you should be using a M&A lawyer that does law for online business acquisitions. Very, very specific type of business law, and you don't want to be hiring a lawyer that is your family lawyer that you might be paying them to get a free education on how to do acquisition law and also make mistakes on your wallet and your dime. That's very, very scary. For the people that I work with, I have a bunch of vetted lawyers and lawyers that have done many M&A transactions and acquisitions on the sell side and the buy side, specific to online businesses, some specific to software, some specific to e-com, some specific to media even. And when I start working with somebody after we've engaged is I share my network with them so they can go away and interview a bunch of the correct lawyers that are going to be the best lawyers for them through the process of an acquisition for an online business. So yeah, you're looking at 1% to 2% for a lawyer. Now, this, like I said before, it does depend on what sort of legal DD they do. Sometimes people just want help with a letter of intent, and it could be either drafting a letter of intent or revising a letter of intent. Maybe people don't add that as a part of their package, and maybe they do just want the asset purchase agreement drafted or the contract of sale drafted, same thing, or revised. And depending on how a lawyer charges, they might charge you per hour. And if you are getting a lot of revisions, it can end up being quite expensive to go by the hour. My advice for people using a lawyer is to work out a package deal is you get these deliverables for X amount of price. And typically then you know what the fixed cost is going to be for the legal DD. So that's just contracts, letter of intent, and then also having the asset purchase agreement or the contract revised or and help drafted. Then you can have the lawyer also do contract DD. They can do IP DD. They can do a bunch of different types of legal DD depending on the business that you're acquiring and what legalities would be important for you to check. So when you do decide to choose a lawyer, have a good conversation with maybe 1 to 3, work out quotes for the type of business you want to acquire, get a package deal for specific deliverables. And I think at least having LOI and APA is important, and then also contractual DD and some commercial due diligence there. So that's typically 1% to 2% of the price of the business. So for a $2 million business at 1%, you're looking at $20K. At 2%, you're looking at $40K for legals. It can be lesser, it can be more depending on who you use. I have some really good lawyers that charge very fair prices for these acquisitions and do great work. Sometimes you can get 1%, sometimes you can get cheaper than 1%, but you at least need to know that you can have that budget. And I'm going to talk about having that budget taken out of your deposit when using finance as well. So stay tuned for that. So that's lawyers. And then you have the finance broker. Typically, the finance broker can charge a fee, and it might be $5,000, it might be $10,000, and we're talking typically up to a $5 million acquisition. You're looking at $5,000 to $10,000 for just the finance broker for doing the work in setting up you with a lender, and also the work they do in presenting a business plan and pitching the business that you're acquiring to certain lenders to use acquisition finance. Some might do it for free, but most are not going to, and you might be looking at $5,000 to $10,000 just for the broker fee alone. And you might find something in between that price range, maybe 7.5 or 6 or 7 grand, 8 grand up to 10 grand. Sometimes a really fancy finance broker might charge a little bit more. I have a bunch of finance brokers that I like to refer people to that are going to acquire a business as well. If they're working with me, I allow people to tap into my network. And these are people that are specific to helping people acquire online businesses. That's same as a lawyer that do this each and every day. So that's the finance broker fee. Then you have the lender fee. Typically, we would call this an SBA fee. So if you're using SBA, typically an SBA fee for a business around $1 million or under, so something up to the first $1 million, you're paying a 3.5% fee for the finance. Okay. So for $1 million, you're looking at $35K. For anything over that $1 million, so say you buy something for $2 million, the first $1 million might look like $35K, and then the $1 million after might look like 3.75% fee. Okay. Now, when you're going through and speaking with a broker, work out what those fees are. Okay. And typically the finance broker fee and the SBA fee is going to be a part of the loan and covered as a part of the loan. It just gets sort of tacked on, like similar when you're acquiring real estate and you have the fees that you need to pay for the bank to set it up and all that sort of stuff. Now, you also have a buy-side advisor fee. Before we talk about the buy-side advisor, let's talk about due diligence packages. I did briefly mention that they can be anywhere between $5,000 to $40,000, depending on the size of the business. Now, if you use a buy-side advisor can charge anywhere from 3% to 8% of the deal size for their fee. Now, you want to check what you get for that. What are the deliverables? Some buy-side advisors will just give advice, and people will only pay for advice. For the buy-side advisor to look at your due diligence or the due diligence you've done, advise on structure and advise on negotiations, and help advise with your lawyer. Now, there's other buy-side advisors that do a lot more. Typically for myself, what I do is I don't just advise people. I go and find the business. So it's getting deal flow. I don't provide an insane amount of deal flow. I pre-vet deals and only bring the deals to my clients that we're likely going to buy. So it's not like deal flow, but I do source the deals. And then I also do provide due diligence as well. And then I consult and advise on structure, negotiations, and manage the deal between buyer and seller and advise on that. And the fees fluctuate depending on the deal size as well. Typically, it's the descension model where the smaller the business, the larger the percentage of fee, and the larger the business, the smaller the percentage of the fee. Okay. Now, that's the buy-side advisor fee. And then you have escrow. Escrow is typical. You're going to use escrow. There's a bunch of different escrow services you can use. I advise my clients to use between 1 to 3 escrow services, and the price of an escrow service is typically around the 1% range of the acquisition, right? So for $1 million business, you're looking at about 10 grand, and then that escrow fee typically is split between the seller and the buyer. So you might pay $5,000 each. Now, I want to talk about some of these fees and how they can actually be incorporated either into finance through SBA and how they're paid for. So say, for example, you're buying $1 million transaction and your advisor fee costs 40 grand, or let's just say round numbers, 50 grand. And then you've also got your legal fee, which let's say is at 1% is 10 grand. So you've got 60 grand in costs there. And say you're buying the business for $1 million with a 10% down payment, that's $100K. With the right finance broker, you can actually have that, you can spend that $100K on deposit and use $100K credit for the deposit. But if with the right finance broker, say you've already spent $60K on the deal and you have receipts for that, say $50K for a broker, and then you've got the $10K for legal DD, that $60K can get taken out of your deposit. So you've already spent that $60K. An advisor is typically not going to get their money until the deal closes. Legals, depending on how you structure your negotiations, typically going to be paid up front. But say you've paid in invoices $60K, you might only need to put $40,000 into the deal, which as a deposit, which adds up to that $100K, because the SBA can allow that money that you spent on an advisor and also on legals to be taken out and used as a credit towards the deposit. So definitely something to consider there. Now, some of you may be thinking, wow, okay, these fees can actually add up. And sure, they do. The power comes from it when you have the right finance broker that can help you maximize your deposit through spending money on the right people and advisors through the acquisition that can get taken out of the deposit. Okay. Also, a good finance broker can help you get working capital for the business as well. So working capital is the expenses need to be paid for the business, and they might get you some working capital for a few months post acquisition that can be embedded into the loan structure as well, which is when you think about it, if you're buying a 7-figure business, $1 million business, let's say 1 million, and you got $100K cash and you can use a 10% deposit for SBA, and then you got all these fees and you put your amount in for a buyer side advisor, for legals, and then you got to put, a portion of 50% down for escrow. And then you've also got your finance broker fee is included typically in the finance, and the SBA fee is typically included in the finance. So you can have that 100K and still acquire a business with just 10% of cash for the size of the business with the right finance broker that can help you get working capital if needed. Sometimes the business is very high cash flow and you might not need working capital, or you have enough cash as well. So you're buying $1 million business with 100K, but you've got 50K in cash for yourself capital. You might not need working capital to be worked into the loan as well. So that's how much it can cost to acquire a 7-figure business. Now, as the businesses go up in size, it can be cheaper. For example, like I said before, your buy-side advisor fee can decrease a couple of percent, depending on if you're going for a larger acquisition. Legal fees can be, everything is in business here is a negotiation. So you can negotiate with your lawyer to work out a good deal, and same with your finance broker as well. But as you start to acquire a larger business, typically it's going to be higher cash flow, and that investment dollars is going to allow you to get a higher return on your investment. So that's why when I'm typically working with people, they'd like to buy a business for as large as possible, because the entry costs can add up, and the larger the business, typically the more stable, the more cash flow, and the better it is to acquire. Now let's talk about some common questions here. Most people typically ask, all right, how long does it take? How long does it take to buy a 7-figure business? Well, how long is a piece of string? And what current environment are we acquiring in, and what's your business criteria? So there's many, many factors that come into how long it can take to acquire a business. First, let's talk about economic environment. Are there a lot of deals in your acquisition price range coming up for sale? If not, then it can take longer. Then you have your acquisition criteria. The stricter your acquisition criteria, or people call it a buy box, the stricter that is, the harder it can be to find the right business. And then you have businesses that are, say, pre-approved by SBA or pre-approved by lenders for acquisition. Those businesses are typically scarce. And when they do come up for sale, they sell very, very fast, especially in the lower price range. I'm talking from 2 million and under, or even 2.5 million under. These sell very, very fast. And the reason they sell very, very fast is because the entry level for somebody buying a 7-figure business is around the $1 to $2 million range. And that means the pool of people may be but larger than the pool of businesses coming up for sale. And at this current environment, that is the reality that we're in. And so it can take a while to get the right business, especially if there's a high level of competition. Now, the reason there's going to be a high level of competition is not only that the pool of buyers may be large because it's the entry point for most people, and then you've got the decrease in stock or minimal stock. But when the right business comes up for sale that is applicable to be acquired with finance, more people can buy it. And when it's also backed by finance, that means it's because it's backed by finance, especially with an SBA backed deal, the SBA is backing that business to do well. So it's already a good vetting process for somebody looking at buying a business to see that, okay, the SBA is going to lend to this, or a finance institution is going to lend to this business. It's very high confidence that it's a decent business. So how long it can take, I don't like to put a time frame on it at all. Sometimes, I've helped people buy a business in a short period of time, a couple of months, and sometimes it can take years, and there's no point walking away after a 1 or 2 or maybe even 3-year mark when in that range towards the end of your journey, you might find something within a month or 2 and it's been worth the wait. And typically that is the case. Patience is so valuable in not just life, but definitely in business. So don't set a high expectation and try to get this done in a short period of time, unless you're a cash buyer. Cash buyers can come in and have more negotiation power because they're buying with cash, and typically they get the business for cheaper than, say, somebody buying it with finance. So if you can afford to buy something with cash, or even mostly cash, say with a larger deposit, say you're not buying something with a 10% down payment, maybe you're buying something with a 30 to 40% down payment, you have a lot more leverage in the marketplace compared to some competitive buyers. Another common question people ask is, what sort of business should I buy? Look, I've got so many podcasts on what type of businesses you could buy and the price ranges, but we're talking about 7-figure businesses here. Most businesses that can be acquired with finance and a small deposit, say 10 to 15, 20%, are going to be e-commerce businesses because the multiples allow that. When it comes to buying a software business or a membership business, recurring revenue business, the multiples are going to be a lot higher. And with a small deposit, the business and typically yourself are not going to be able to cover the debt service ratio, so the debt service for that business. And so that's why it's typically most people are in the 5 mil and under price range are acquiring e-commerce businesses. Sometimes, depending on the market, we might be looking at media businesses and what type of media businesses they are, depending on the environment of organic traffic and from where. And lastly, I want to finish off with just expectations. Expectations are crushing. If you set a high expectation, and I think we should have definitely a high standard for ourselves to a certain degree. But if we hold such a high standard to ourselves and our acquisition and our goals, with it being highly unattainable or very hard to, that can be a mental strain on us when we are trying to get closer and closer to the carrot, and it just keeps moving further and further away because we just keep increasing our standards. Or we set expectations that is just not going to match reality. how most people win at life is they set themselves up to win and not set themselves up to fail. And there's a very, very, very insanely powerful and valuable reason for that. And that is that the more you set your expectations really, really high and your standards really, really high, and they're so far out from what reality is, from where you're at and where you're wanting to go, when you get closer and closer, or you get sort a certain way towards that goal, those expectations and standards, and you don't achieve it. Each time you don't achieve that, or each time you just don't get as far as you want to, it's very bad for the mindset. And that compounding over multiple times of you failing and not getting somewhere is then you start to feel like a failure, versus the opposite. If you have a lot of smaller wins and you don't have crazy expectations, and you set a standard that is realistically going to stretch you, but is definitely achievable at the same time, is you're likely to achieve that. And that might be a small win. And then compounding all of those small wins allows you to build so much more confidence and resilience, because you'll back yourself in larger problems when you have a little bit more of a stretch, but is very, very realistic. So when you're doing anything in life, any goal, especially when it comes to an acquisition, speak to people that know what they're doing. They know the market, that they can advise you, and they can set a real expectation for you and a goal, and they can actually achieve that. And it might be a little bit of a stretch. It might be a little bit out of your comfort zone, which is great because you've got somebody walking that path with you. Make sure it's going to meet reality, versus coming to the space and saying, I've got 100K and I want to buy a $3 million business. And if you've never bought acquisition before, and you might not have much credit worthiness, but you heard from some podcaster or influencer that you can buy a business no money down. Well, in theory, yeah, you can, but are you going to be buying something that is, the seller is desperate and they're selling it because it's a depreciating asset? Maybe, likely. All those things just don't exist, right? And it can be done in theory, but what are you actually buying? So be kind to yourself. Think about this logically. Be fair. Set realistic expectations and set yourself up to win. If you guys have any questions around how I work as a buy-side advisor, or any questions around acquisitions, exits, scaling, let me know. I've found that these solo podcast episodes are hugely valuable. Seems like I cram a lot in a short period of time. So please, please, please don't just listen to this and let it fade off and forget about it. Hit the reply button, comment, let me know what your questions, reach out, Jaryd@buyingonlinebusiness.com. I'm here for you guys. I want to set you guys up to win, because when you win, we all win. So why should we just start winning? Thanks for listening, guys. See you in the next one.